Tonight is Halloween, the night where the dead can visit the world of the living. And so I have a story for you. It is a story from Scotland, and it's a story of a hunter. And one day, the hunter was in the forest with his two beautiful, loyal and faithful hound dogs. They had worked hard, and so in the hunter's sack there were two mighty fine hares. And as the hunter was on his way home, suddenly he noticed that the weather had begun to turn. He saw the thunderous clouds gathering above the trees, and he knew that it would soon be pouring down with rain. He had no desire to get wet, so he decided that instead of going home, it would be better to go to the little bothy in the middle of the forest. He reached the bothy, a little ramshackle old building, and the door was open. So he made his way in, and just in time, for the wind was whipping and whirling around that little bothy, and he let the dogs in because they had earned a warm place to stay that night. He loaded the fire with the wood that was piled nearby, and he lit the flames, and soon the three of them were enjoying the warmth of this little cottage. A few hours passed, when suddenly the hunter became aware of a scratching sound. He followed the sound, and it came from the door, and by now the rain was pouring thick and fast. He could feel the wind whipping around that little cottage, and he could feel and hear the rain slushing and spattering and beating on that little place. And as he opened the door, he saw in front of him a tiny little black cat. It was shivering, soaking wet, and it raced between the hunter's legs into the bothy, and it cowered in a corner. Immediately, the two hound dogs were up, ready to leap on it, growling and barking, but the hunter commanded them to stop and stay. The hound dogs obeyed because they were loyal and faithful, but they did not take their eyes off the little scrawny black creature, and every now and again they emitted a low, warning growl. The hunter stared at the sodden creature, and he spoke out loud and said, "Cat, what are we going to do with you?" When to his astonishment, the cat spoke and said, "I am a witch. I am a witch, and I have been trying to escape the clutches of the devil. But when I revealed my plans to my sisters, they chased after me through the forest, and that is how I found my way to this bothy. Please, hunter, I beg you, do not turn me out, because there is danger out there for me. I promise that in the morning I will leave before you're awake, and you will never see me again, but please do not turn me out." The hunter was astonished, and he was no lover of witches. But there was something about the way she spoke. She seemed so pathetic, so vulnerable, so small and frail, and his heart was filled with compassion for the little creature. So he agreed that she could stay. But the dogs were not convinced, and they did not take their eyes off her, and every now and again they emitted a low, warning growl. But after some time had passed, the hunter noticed how the little cat shivered and cowered in her corner, and he asked her to approach the fire. "No, that I cannot do, because look at your hound dogs. They cannot wait to leap on me and tear me apart. I do not feel safe. However, if you were to take a hair from my fur, and if you were to tie up those hound dogs, then perhaps I should feel safe." The hunter listened to the words of the cat. He reached forward and plucked a hair. The hair was long and grew longer in his hands, and it was thin and fine, and he tied it around the necks of his hound dogs. But he knew that the cat was a witch, and he was no lover of witches. So as he threw the hair over the beam in the rafters, he pretended to tie a knot. But the cat, feeling safe, ventured over towards the fireplace. She arched her back and she settled down for the night. But as the hunter watched her, he saw that she appeared larger than she was before, and a knot of fear grew in his stomach. Trying to lighten the mood, he laughed and said, "Oh, little cat, you seem to be getting bigger." "Oh, no," replied the cat. "It must be your imagination, or perhaps it is just my fur drying and puffing out makes me appear larger." But the hunter saw that she was growing in size, getting larger and larger until she was a monstrous size. And then the cat was gone, and in its place there was a hideous creature. Her hair was dark and straggly, her back and shoulders scrunched, curved, fingers twisted, and on the end of them were claws, sharp talons that curved like an eagle's. And as she towered over the hunter, she spoke. "I know you. I know how much you hate the witches, how much your allies detest us, despise us, chase and hunt us. And I visited your closest friend, and he is no more. And now I have come for you." And she raised herself to her greatest height. Her fingers and claws were out. She raised them up to the sky and ready to pounce on the hunter. But as she did leap, the hunter gave the command, and the hound dogs attacked. They leapt onto that witch, clawing and nipping at her legs and her arms, scratching, biting. They leapt onto her chest, sinking their teeth in deep, and the witch cried out in rage and pain. "Get off me! Leave me! Leave me be!" she cried. But the dogs were bred for hunting. They were strong, fearless, powerful, and they did not let go. No matter how much the witch cried out, no matter how much she struggled and fought, she could not get the dogs off her. She headed towards the door, scratched, clawed at the handle, finally flinging it open, and when she ventured outside, she spread her arms wide, transformed herself into a large black bird, and flew off into the night and the rain. The hunter, his heart pounding with the events that had just taken place, he left the house, the bothy, and went towards the dogs. They were badly wounded in the battle, so he carried them in and gently laid them before the fire. But the witch had done terrible damage, and the dogs, although they heard him whisper his gratitude, neither one survived. The hunter's heart was broken. He cried tears of pain. He stroked the coats of his beautiful dogs. And then in the morning, he went outside, dug 2 graves, and gently placed the bodies of his beloved hounds inside. Sadly, he headed back to his home, and he could see it, the outline on the hill, and he couldn't wait to see his wife, waiting for those arms of hers to wrap around him, to soothe him and stroke him and tell him that everything would be okay. But when he entered the house, she was not there. And he called out, and it was most unusual for her to not be in the house, but there was no reply. And rather peeved, he waited. And a few hours later she returned. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Oh, I went to visit the good wife of Laggan," she said. "Oh, she's been in terrible pain." "Oh," said the hunter. "What was wrong with her?" "Oh, she complained of pain in her chest since last night. They think she's going to die." And the hunter, when he heard those words, he was curious, and he said, "Where does the good wife live?" The wife gave the directions, and the hunter immediately left his house and went to visit the good wife of Laggan. When he arrived at her little cottage, he saw that inside all her neighbors had gathered. She was in her bed, the blankets pulled up to her chest, and everyone was weeping and praying, and words of comfort were given to her. But the hunter strode over to the bed, forcing his way through the masses. He grabbed hold of the blanket and he ripped it off, exposing the wounds of the night before. And he said, "This good wife of yours is no good wife at all. She is a witch, capable of the most evil things. She has murdered our good friend in the east, and last night she came for me, and had it not been for the courage and bravery of my 2 dogs, I would not be here with you today. Look at the wounds that they left on her body." And the neighbors, they leaned in and examined her, and she cried out, "He is right. Everything I did, I swear it was not of my doing. I have to do what the devil tells me to do because I am his. But please, if I confess now, then hopefully you can forgive me." And in those moments, the good wife of Laggan spilled out every atrocity that she had committed, every evil word that she had ever said, every plot that she had connived, every single secret that she held was spilled out into the ears of the neighbors around her. And when she had finished, she closed her eyes, her chest stilled, and she was gone. But outside, just down the road, there were 2 travelers, and as they rode along towards that little village, they saw a strange sight before them. There was an old woman, her back and shoulders scrunched up, her straggly hair blowing in the wind, and she seemed to be in considerable pain. She raced towards them and said, tell me, where is the kirkyard? Please show me the way to the kirkyard." And they said, "It's not too far behind us." "Will I make it there before midnight?" the old woman asked. And they said, "If you carry on at this pace, then aye, you shall." And then, as an afterthought, they thought perhaps they should offer to help. But when they looked behind them, she was already making her way at great speed. So the travelers carried on. But just a few moments after that, approaching them, they saw a rider on a big black horse. He had a black coat and a black hat, and before him were 2 black dogs, sniffing the ground with great excitement, hot on the trail of something, their tails sticking up high into the air. And as he approached them, he spoke and said, "Tell me, have you seen a woman pass this way?" "Aye," the travelers replied. "Where was she headed?" "To the kirkyard," they replied. And with that, the rider rode past them at great speed. The travelers were confused at this turn of events, and they carried on, ready to tell the story to the people of the village. But moments after the rider had galloped on behind them, they heard the sound of hooves, and they turned, and just then they saw the rider overtake them at great speed. But there, in front of him, was the body of the old woman, her back and shoulders hunched, and clinging to her were those 2 dogs. And when they told the story of what they had seen, the people of that village knew that the old woman the travelers had encountered was none other than the good wife of Laggan. And she had tried to make her way to the sanctuary of the kirkyard before midnight, but unfortunately for her, the devil was far too